Hey everyone, this is Rob Keens of goldsilverpros.com. We were reporting this on April 22nd, 2021. I have a very special first-time guest on the program. It is Paul Harris. He is the editor of the Mining Journal for the Americas and also has 18 years of experience in the mining sector in Latin America. Paul, how are you doing today?
Hey, good morning, Rob. Very well, thank you. How are you?
Very good. We were having a great conversation before we got on just about traveling. So we're both traveling today. I'm out. We're both on the East Coast and traveling for business. And you and I were speaking before about opportunities that you cover in South America. So I kind of wanted to start there. What are some of the opportunities that you're seeing in South America for investors that they may want to be interested in and some of the things that you're seeing?
Okay, well, I focus on the mining sector and mainly on the exploration and development side of things. And within that, mainly on sort of gold and copper, which are the principal metals that explorers tend to look for. Anything else tends to be much more specialized. So that's where I sort of cast my net, so to speak. And there are explorations starting to really pick up, given the increase in the price of gold over the past couple of years, silver, and more recently, the copper price. And so more exploration companies are forming, and they're going out there, they're getting projects. They've been able to raise a lot of money, good money, and they're drilling like crazy. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of, it's a good time coming to the sector again.
Yeah, it sounds like it. I was speaking with my friend Kai Hoffman, who runs Oren Inc. And is relocated out there to Canada, and he tracks investment in the resource sector, specifically for juniors. And we were talking last year, and it seems as though investment kind of came into the space when gold went up, and then it kind of left, and it didn't stay there. And it seems as though maybe we're starting to get a little bit more ramp up into the investment space. So what you're seeing is you are seeing sort of the money come back to mining a little bit.
It is. It's been away for a long time.
Yes.
There's a big historical deficit. Exploration hasn't really happened for much of the past sort of 8 years or so during the down cycle. So it's starting from a sort of relatively low base. It's coming back in because the prices are coming up, demand is picking up. And when you start talking about the forecast for commodities such as copper, most organizations predict or forecast that there's a supply deficit coming. And so, really is now is a great time to be an exploration company in metals.
Yeah, it seems as though, of course, we had gold and silver do really well in the last year, especially since last March and the pandemic hit. But we've also seen some of the base metals start to recover. We've seen copper, lithium, zinc are just some of the ones I've seen recover. Do you suppose that's because the economies are restarting, or do you think it's just general growth? Or what is your take on why people are coming back into those commodities?
I think the world economy is recovering from the sort of COVID-19 shutdown is clearly a main driver. But beyond that and beside that, you've got this big push towards renewable energy, for decarbonization of the world economy, decarbonization of transportation, decarbonization of the energy sector. And to do that requires a huge amount of investment, and that requires a huge amount of minerals and metals. President Biden here in the United States is talking about a $2.3 billion infrastructure program. That's going to be spent on things from concrete, steel rebar, copper wiring, all kinds of things. It's going to suck in a lot of minerals. Around the world, governments are trying to decarbonize their energy and transportation sectors. That means more hydro, more solar, more wind, electric vehicles. All of that will use a lot more copper and other base metals as well. So, it's a new source of demand, and it's just, supersizing the sort of cycles that were already underway.
It's a really good point you bring up. I feel like a lot of people don't understand that the mining sector is really critical to the green energy movement. Electric vehicles, reducing carbon emissions, a lot of the advancements that the governments want to make there. And I saw in the paper this morning, I didn't have time to read the full story, but Biden announced a plan to reduce carbon emissions by, I think, 52%. If I read that correctly in the paper this morning. So definitely the new administration is getting serious about it. So can you explain a little bit about the link between the mining industry and the movement towards green technology?
Well, first off, it's not just the Biden administration. Earlier this week, the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced it's increasing its goals or targets to reduce CO2 emissions. China's done the same thing. I think it's going to look to be carbon neutral, something like that, by 2050. So major world economies are all doing this. So copper is a key mineral in this, because copper is the mineral for transmitting or conducting electricity. And so all of these green energy technologies, and here we're talking about taking fossil fuels out of the energy equation. So that's coal, natural gas, oil, things like that, and replacing them where possible with electricity. And electricity is generated through solar, through wind, through steam, through hydro, and that all needs to be directed to where it needs to go. And for that, you need copper. Electric vehicles use a lot more copper than standard internal combustion engine vehicles. But not just that, the infrastructure you need to be able to charge them to make it really, really viable for mass consumption of these vehicles. You need to put in these EV charging points throughout the city, throughout the interstate highway network, etc. And that is going to suck in a huge amount of copper.
Yeah, I agree. And I think copper reached a 9 or 10-year high, I saw in the paper the other day as well. So
yeah.
So it definitely seems like if you are looking at maybe those major copper projects, maybe the gold, copper, porphyry projects where you want to get exposure to gold, people on my channel love the precious metals, but you also want to get exposure to copper. Those are very common. And we've seen a lot of those sort of polymetallic deposits sort of come back into vogue and come back into fashion. In the area of the world that you've looked at, since you've been covering this for 18 years, in Latin America, what are the trends that you're seeing there in terms of what companies are going after, the types of deposits, and what types of things that they're finding?
Well, starting with copper, there aren't a great deal of projects out there, and to find one, to explore it, to prove whether it's feasible or not economically, and to get it permanently in production, you could be looking at 15 or 20 years. So it's not a case you can find something, turn on the tap, and there it is. The lead times are huge. With gold and precious metals projects, they're a little bit shorter, but they're still, sizable. And the trend is they're increasing because communities around the world, governments around the world, local stakeholders are raising the bar in terms of what they demand from miners to have a project in their neighborhood, in terms of the environmental performance, how they're going to care for the air, how they're going to care for the water, and other environmental aspects. And so permitting regulations are getting tougher. This is the same whether you're in Canada, the United States, Chile, Peru, Colombia. It's getting tougher to permit projects. And so that again means it takes longer to bring new supply into operation. And so, all of this creates a landscape where, good projects are scarce and getting scarcer. And so that also creates opportunities for investors where good projects are discovered and they are proven to be feasible and they do have a path through permitting. They're going to go into production, and quite possibly they're going to be targets for M&A activity, for mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make up, and so glad you brought that up. I was having this discussion with quite a few people on what's happening in the mining sector, and it seems as though, and I'll just use gold as an example since I study it so much, you have sort of the major companies, but they're running into a reserves depletion issue right now, where to get additional reserves, they're not finding the big fields that they had found historically. They're finding a bunch of smaller fields. Maybe it's more disseminated metal. You're not getting your 20, 30 grams per ton anymore. The average, if you get something over 2 to 3 grams per ton, that's considered pretty good nowadays. So they're having to pay a premium for some of these smaller companies to acquire them, to restore their reserves. And I'm wondering, are we at a point, and maybe this is true outside of gold as well, maybe it's true of copper and some of these other metals, are we at a point where it's going to be harder to keep up the models of the majors, and we're going to see sort of the rise of these smaller and mid-sized companies, which are many more of them providing metal rather than relying on the big majors?
I think Certainly in the short term, that is happening. The concentration of the industry, if you like, it has diluted. There's more companies now, sort of mid-tier producers, than there were, let's say, 10 years ago. So there is pressure for consolidation from that point of view. The argument being, you put companies together, you can generate synergies, you can take out costs, and deal with the lower grades that you're talking about. High prices change things, and the prospect is prices can get even higher. So that makes it, lower grade deposits can become economic if the price rises sufficiently. So, that's obviously starting to happen. But the big producers are very conscious of the need to keep a cap on costs and to continue the pressure to drive costs down, or at least to maintain them stable. So it's an interesting time from that point of view. But the high prices has allowed smaller companies to come into existence and come into production, and some of those are doing very well. But medium, longer term, the belief is that there will be consolidation. The best assets migrating towards the better companies.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And so if you're an investor out there, maybe your target's to find some exploration companies or near-term development companies that have a sizable deposit that may be good takeout targets. And if somebody like a Gold Corp or Barrick or somebody wants to come down and grab one of those, they can do that. Wanted to ask you a question about what you're seeing in terms of jurisdiction. So you covered Latin America, you covered the Americas, but you covered Latin America. So how is that jurisdiction different than some of the others? So people are used to investing in the Canadian fields or Australia, and they want to come down to South America or Central America. Are those safe jurisdictions? Are they pretty good jurisdictions to get into if you're an investor?
It varies. There's some similarities and there's some differences. One of the key risks now is the permitting risk, which we sort of just touched on. It's getting harder. Countries are being more demanding, and that's the same whether you're in Canada, the US, or in Latin America. The security situation in some countries can be challenging, so that's one thing to look out for. And we're going through an election cycle in many countries, and so always in Latin American elections, there's populist candidates that they say they'll nationalize resources or seek to increase taxes on natural resource companies, things of that nature. This is happening right now in Peru, to a lesser extent in Chile as well, but it happens in North America as well. Trump and Biden. Biden's a Democrat, and Democrats tend to want to bring in more environmental regulation and legislation, which can make it a lot more difficult for projects to get permitted. So each country's got its pluses and minuses. There isn't an easy country anymore. Yeah,
that's a good point. So it seems it seems like you used to be able to focus on just North American projects or just Australian, but with the lack of the sizable deposits, the rise of the more mid-tier companies, and what you said, the changes in the government's approach, it seems as though if you really want to be successful as an investor, it makes sense to understand more than one jurisdiction and to maybe invest in multiple jurisdictions. And maybe they're more on a level playing field than they used to be, perhaps.
Well, yeah, as an investor, it's always good to diversify, to spread your risk. A lot of mining and exploration companies prefer to operate in Canada and certain states in the United States, principally because they're known entities. They know what the regulatory process is. They know how long it's going to take to get through it. Stable government, stable jurisdictions. In other countries, you're perhaps taking a bit more of a risk there because you don't know how long it will take your project to get through permitting. And some companies see that as an unacceptable risk. Canada and the US have some very well-known and very productive gold, precious metals districts. So companies that have projects in those areas can be very sought after. A lot of the M&A activity we've seen in the gold space, for example, in the past 6 months, has tended to focus on Nevada, British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec. Why? Because they're mining jurisdictions. They've got a long history of mining. They've got known rules and regulations, and companies are very comfortable operating there.
Yeah, those are good points as well. So from the perspective of what you cover for the Mining Journal, can you give people some information on what the Mining Journal does? And if they're interested in the Mining Journal, how do they find the Mining Journal?
Okay, the Mining Journal has been a publication about the mining sector for 170 years. It was founded in London, England, and it's now sort of global with offices in sort of Canada, London, and Australia. We write about mining generally from exploration through development and into production, things around it to do with government regulation, mining technology, and investment. So the whole suite of things related to mining. People can see it on www.mining-journal.com.
Okay, great. Are there subscription options for people?
Yes, yeah. It's a subscription. Okay. There is some free information available on the website. Most of it's behind a paywall, so it's a subscription service.
Gotcha. And a little bit about your history, if you don't mind. How did you come about to writing for the Mining Journal?
My exposure to mining was a happy accident, and that happened well over 20 years ago. I went to business school. I did a postgraduate in printing and publishing, ended up working for a business publisher that just happened to have a mining and oil and gas title, and it gave me exposure. And from there on, I went, a career started, and it's been one of those happy coincidences. It's been one of the best things in life. It's a career that's taken me around the world. Mining sector is a great sector to be involved with. There's some really good people there, and it's a sector that can really make a difference. People have lost contact with where things come from. Things, generally speaking, come from mining in some way, shape, or form. And I think people are starting to realize that again as the environmental crisis and things like that, and decarbonization of the energy sector. People are starting to see, where mining fits into things.
Yeah, I agree with you. I read a quarterly newsletter called the Golden Quarterly for our subscribers, and I wrote in there just this past week, the spring quarterly we released, that I feel as though the next cycle of wealth generation is going to in some way encompass the mining sector, because it seems as though right now we've gotten so far away from the basics of where things come from that we're investing in all these other things. And tech is great. I've had a 20+ year history in tech and have degrees in the field, but at some point it all comes back down to where we get our materials and that we need for daily life. And it, like you said, it's all mining or harvesting in some way. And so I feel as though that industry has really been ignored for a long time, and the valuations need to come back. So it's good to see that we're starting to see the investment come back. The valuations need to come back, though, to attract some of the larger money, I think. And from that perspective, I wanted to ask you a different sort of question. So a lot of what we do is marketing. It's helping companies reach investors and vice versa. What do you think are the main challenges in that space for some of the companies that you're involved with, and for example, that come to your conference?
I think one of the key challenges is that there are so many exploration companies out there. And by and large, they've all got the same message. Hey, we've got a great project, we've got a great team, give us the money, we'll drill it and we'll get great results. So it's very hard for companies to differentiate themselves and distinguish themselves. So investors in the sector tend to look at the management team first, what their track record is, what their history is, who's involved in the project, and the type of project, and then the jurisdiction. Look at what their aims are, what their goals are. There's a lot of noise in the space. There's people that are, let's say, less scrupulous and just out there to try and fleece investors. And so there's a lot of competing noise out there. So it is quite a challenge for good projects to get heard. But over time, good companies show their drilling results, they progress in a meaningful way, and you see investors gravitate towards them.
So you have a conference in South America for people who are interested in that area of the world, and I think you're helping to solve that problem. You're building a marketplace for the companies, investors to come together. Can you speak a little bit about that and when your next conference is going to be?
Yes, we started the Colombia Gold Symposium 6 years ago. Originally, the aim was just to focus on gold exploration in Colombia, but it's broadened out to more of a regional event and also covering copper as well. And the aim is really to provide people with a sort of one-stop shop of information. They can get information about the projects, they can meet management teams, they can get information about the regulatory or environmental aspect of the jurisdiction, and get all their answers, all their questions answered in one place, in one conference.
Yeah, it's really great when you get to come together, especially when you can travel. I know some of the Canadian conferences we haven't been able to travel to. Hopefully those get booted up again. If people are interested maybe in coming down to Colombia or going to be in that area and want to attend that conference, how would they go about finding more information?
The website is colombiagold.co. We're currently updating it, so this year's event information isn't on there yet, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks that will be there. It's colombiagold.co.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Paul. So any last thoughts? I'll leave the last one open for you as I do all my guests. Anything that you want to speak to our guests about that we haven't covered that you find interesting?
I just think it's a really interesting time to be in and around the mining sector. Mining's a cyclical business, and we're now coming into an upcycle. And this is going to last for several years, both in the base metals such as copper, but also in the precious metals. So it's a great time to be involved. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of activity, and so it's one of those moments in time that successful investors will be able to make life-changing investments, because things are going to go up, could go up considerably, and as I say, you can make life-changing investments.
Yeah, and hopefully that also translates to the companies as well, because we do need them to produce the things we all rely on. So hopefully good investors find good companies and everything works out for the companies that are really doing the good work and building the mines and bringing us the materials that we need on an everyday basis.
Absolutely. And, one sort of final comment there, ESG is a huge issue now. Mm-hmm. And companies take it very, very seriously, both in terms of having a diverse workforce, caring for the environment, mitigating their impacts, and compensating for their impacts. It's not the mining sector of the past that left trails of environmental devastation. No, the mining sector cares for the environment, it cares for water sources, it cares for the communities. Most of the companies I speak to genuinely want to make a positive impact to the regions where they're operating, beyond just making a profit for their shareholders.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, and it ties into what the new investor wants. The millennials are now coming into their prime spending age and therefore their prime investing age by extension. So, and a lot of what the research I saw was that about 85% of them will invest with a cause in mind. So it's not just investing for a return on investment, the old, sort of old school business method that I was taught in school. It's also, okay, what are you doing for the world? Or at least how are you acting responsibly in what you're doing? So those ESG initiatives in the mining industry are really going to appeal to the new generation, to the extent that as we do marketing for certain companies on our channel, we tell all of the mining company execs, we want to talk about any initiatives you have in the area. If you're doing something positive and bringing jobs to that area, if you're building water treatment, if you're doing responsible mining and using, less caustic chemicals, whatever it is, we want to talk about that. And we also want to talk about what your product is used for. So if you're in lithium and that's helping, the electric car market for the batteries, we want to talk about that. If copper, is used in everything, silver for its antimicrobial properties and for medicine, and those are the things we want to emphasize. Do you see at your conference companies starting to emphasize that a little bit more to appeal to investors?
Absolutely. We have sessions focusing on new technologies coming through that enable miners to do things in a more efficient, cleaner way. And we also talk about some of the social initiatives they undertake. In Latin America, mining companies are often development companies, and the money for the development just happens to come from a mining project. But they're regional development companies. They're not just paying taxes and royalties, but actively investing in the communities to generate, local government capacity, small businesses, health, schooling, education, things like that. So a mining company, a mine project can make a huge, huge difference. It's not just digging stuff out of the ground and selling it.
Yeah, it's really good to see that trend. Okay, Paul, that's all the questions I have for you today. If people want to reach out to you directly, how would they go about finding you?
My email is paul.southamerica@gmail.com, and I'm on Twitter at pharris1313.
Okay. Thank you so much, Paul. We appreciate your time on the program today.
Thank you, Rob. It's been a pleasure.
For all of our subscribers, this is the first in a new interview series we're going to be called the Professional Series. We want to bring you some professionals that have inside access to the industry, those that are analysts, also people that are in the markets and work for the companies as well. Stay tuned to the channel for more on that. Until next time, this is Rob with Gold Silver Pros.